Hi there. In this video, I intend to show you 25 different features of JetEngine Query Builder that you probably did not know about. And although I do not intend to go into each of them in full detail, it is my hope that at the end of this, you will be exposed to a little more knowledge than you already have. Since I will publish each item as a separate detailed video in the future, you should subscribe to my channel so you can be updated when a detailed video is published. Feel free to use the video timestamps to skip around, and if you have any questions about any feature, I have a 100% record of responding to all comments, so leave one below. My name is Toby Salami, and I'm about to show you many features of Crocoblock JetEngine Query Builder that you probably did not know about. Are you ready? I'd like to call the first feature on our list Catch Queries for Faster Queries. And here's how you do it. Whenever you create a new JetEngine Query Builder query, you see this Catch Query option right here. And just for context and so you can understand how it all works, this option is meant to help you speed up your site so that once a person visits your site with the query you have created and the query has already run, the subsequent visits to the site will all have the post or whatever is queried here fetched from Catch, so it doesn't run an SQL query every single time. And this is good for site performance. Just so you can understand and know that this actually works for you, you need to come down here to Tools and come to Site Health. Once you're inside Site Health, you want to come inside here to Info, and you want to scroll down here to where you have WordPress constant and ensure that WP Cache is enabled. If it's not enabled, I'm sure you can do a quick Google search and figure it out, so let's go to the next one. Did you know that with JetEngine Query Builder, you can nest your queries infinitely? Let me show you how. I have a query here, which is a query of users on the site. And if we take a look at this query, just so we can understand how it all works, it's a query type of users. And inside of the include option here, we have the ID, my ID, the ID of my particular user account on this site, which is 1. And this is the user ID that I'm including in this particular query. I'm sure it's possible for you to do something else here, such as fetch this from a query variable like this. You can get it from query variable and type the variable name that's going to be in the URL or whatever you want to do, but that's going to be for a later video. Right now, I just want to keep things as simple as possible. Let's imagine that you fetch it from anywhere you want to fetch it from, and it returns the ID 1. Now, you can nest that query inside another query in this way. Come to Query Builder, and let's say you want to query post, for example. So I'm going to add new and query post. Let's call this query of posts, and we're going to put in brackets nested query. And that's it. And we're going to come down here to post and select post type as post. And we're going to select published as the post status. Now, the next thing we want to do, because of course the use of this query is that we want to query posts that belong to the following authors in a list of comma separated IDs. Now, you can very easily type it in here, for example, 1, 6, 12 as the different user IDs that are going to be returned into this query, but you can also do something even more fancier, and which affords you the opportunity to do something that is even better, which is this. You can select this icon here for the macros, and you can type in here query and select here query results, and then you're going to select the query of users, of course the query you previously selected, and you want to select list of items IDs. It's going to return the IDs of all of the users in this query, which in this case is just this one, right? But just keep in mind, you can nest this query inside another one, and in this query of post, you can have another query which is going to fetch all of the query of authors. And you can have this in multiple places. You can have this being fetched from somewhere else. Let's say you have a tax query, a taxonomy query, and you want the terms to be fetched from another query. Please feel free to explore all of the possibilities here, as your imagination is truly the limit here. We're down to our next feature, which is to merge multiple same queries. And to do that, let's demonstrate it. Let's add a new query. Recall that we first had a query that we created as a query of users here. Let's add a new query that we're going to fetch another query of users. So let's say a query of other users. And maybe for this particular query, we just want to select users query and fetch only people who are editors on the site. It doesn't matter what their user IDs are, we just want to fetch editors on the site. Keep in mind, first of all, we had a query here for query of users, and we want to create another query here, which is query of other users, which now is going to fetch users with the user role of editor. And it doesn't really matter what you specify inside the query here. You just want to query two same query types. User query for the first, user query for the second. It's all the same. Now you can add a new query. Now you want to create a third query. This particular query is going to combine the first and the second together. And here's how you do it. Merge the two user queries. That's what I choose to call these queries. You can call it whatever you want to call it. I like to get fancy with my names. And now you can come to query type and select here, merged query. Once you select that, you want to come down here and select the query type of users, a comment, users, and now you can select the queries to merge. You select the first one, query of other users, you select the next one, query of users. Now you have a query that merges these two queries together, and you also have the additional ability to exclude items if in the first one there is a user ID that repeats in the second. You don't want it to show twice, right, in your listing, so you want to exclude any duplicated items, and that's why you toggle this on. You can also set the maximum number of items on the page that after both queries are combined, it limits the number of queries that can show. And now you can add the query, and that is how you merge two queries together. Here's the next feature. We want to create a general query for anywhere. And before I explain this, I want to show you why we need to do this. Previously, when you come inside of the edit page here and you put inside of here a listing grid widget, usually you would want to toggle on use as archive template if this particular listing item is going to be shown on an archive page. For example, on a search page or a term page of a particular taxonomy, or a user archive page, or a post archive page, whatever kind of archive page you want to use this particular listing for, you usually in the past needed to toggle on use as archive template. And it appeared to work for most of the times where we wanted to use this. However, with the invention of the Query Builder by JetEngine, we no longer needed to toggle this on here, because of the fact that once we use a custom query, almost every other thing inside of the settings here stops working. So we need something that mimics the use of use as archive template, and that is what brings us to the next point here. If you come into Query Builder, here's how you do it. First, you want to say that this is a general query. Whatever name you want to call it is entirely up to you. What's really important here is the query type, which is going to be current WP query. Now take note that based on what you select here as the post per page, for example, let's say we want to say the post per page of the search results should be 20. We can now add this query and base our listing on that particular query. So we'll just toggle on use custom query and then select general query as the query there. Now we will no longer need to toggle on use as archive template, because now this particular single query can work pretty much everywhere. Let's talk about letting filters depend on queries to work. And for that, we're going to create a simple filter. But before we create the filter, let's see what we need to do. Let's create, first of all, a terms query. And this particular query will just simply query all of the category terms we have for the post type of posts. So let's say query of categories. Now we're going to select, of course, because this is a terms query, we're going to select terms, and then we're going to come to taxonomy and select categories. Now, once we're done with that, we're going to leave everything else as is and just click on add query. Now we have this query which we want to return all of the terms that are inside of the taxonomy called categories. To see whether it is truly returning these items, you want to toggle on preview results. We'll be referring to this from time to time in the course of this particular video, so you want to keep this in mind. As you can see here, there are 4 items returned back here as the terms inside of that taxonomy, And of course, if we check this on the categories here, we see there are actually 4 items here. So it makes sense. It means this particular one is working just as we want it to. Now, next, we want to create a filter, and we want to base our filter on this particular query. So let's update the query to be sure everything is correctly saved. And let's come down here to filters and add new. Once we click on add new, we can select and type in any filter name of our choice. Let's say filter based on query. Now, this particular query situation will work whether you're using checkbox, select, or radio field. Now, let's just use, for this particular example, a radio field because we want to be able to select from any of the terms we have on our list, right? On the data source, we want to select JetEngine Query Builder. Keep in mind, not JetEngine Query Builder Switcher. I covered the use case for JetEngine Query Builder Switcher in a different video, so you want to look at that in the top right of this video if you want to see more information about that and how it works. Right now, we're focusing on JetEngine Query Builder as the data source. Now we want to select under query, we want to select that query that we just created, which is the query of categories. Now it asks 2 questions. One, where do we get the value from? And where do we get the label from? Now, to know the answers to those questions, we want to toggle on again preview results for that particular query. Now look inside of the structure here of the way the data is returned when this item is queried. And look at one of them. And you see that we have term ID here. We want to use that as the value. So we're going to type in here or just paste it in term ID. Next, we want to find the label. What do we want to show in the front end for the users to be able to see and know that this is the particular term they're about to select? It only feels natural to select name, right? So we're going to copy that, which is going to return beauty or return love or return relationships, whatever it is you want to return. You just want to select that particular key and paste it in here, which is name, and there you go. Now, you have one more item to select from here and to set, which is the query variable. Because we're fetching our data from the data source of JetEngine Query Builder, it doesn't make much sense to the filter because the filter doesn't even know what we're fetching. It doesn't know whether it's a term or whether it's a list of users. It doesn't know. The only way to tell it what we're actually doing is to come down here to query variable and select from here this icon and actually tell it what kind of data we fetched. And right now we know we fetched a taxonomy, right? So we're just going to select taxonomy and we're going to select the type of the taxonomy, which of course is categories, right? And that's it. Once we're done with that and we hit an update, we can now use this filter to filter any kind of post we want in the front end, and it would work like a regular taxonomy filter, as if or as though we made use of the regular JetEngine taxonomy data source here. Only that we use the query builder and we have even more power. I'm going to cover more information about that in the video I have coming soon on the Crocoblock YouTube channel. But how about if you want the reverse to happen? I mean, if you want the query variables to change depending on what a user selects in a filter in the front end. I'm going to show you that right now. Here's how you do it. Let's add a new query. Let's say that the query you want to create is a post query and you can give it a name of your choice. Let's call this post query depending on filter. You would ask a question. Isn't the filter normally supposed to filter posts based on the fact that they're filters? Well, yes, but in certain cases, you want the exact data selected from the filter to be the basis for the query. It's complicated, but let me try to explain some more. If you come down here to post type and select post, and let's say the post status is published, all of that really doesn't matter for this to actually work. But what you really need is, let's say, a tax query, and you want to say that the taxonomy here is, and of course you would want to select here the category taxonomy or whatever kind of taxonomy you want to select, your choice. Now you want to come to field and say that the term ID, remember that when we created the filter previously in the previous step, we set the term ID as the value. And of course, that's what you want sent from the filter into this query. So you want to say that the term ID should fetch its information from somewhere, but from where? Now, to select the terms taxonomy to get post by, you want to select this, which is the macro option here, and type in Jet Smart Filters query. Now, once you select Jet Smart Filters query, you have a few options that comes up here. You have plain query variable, you have taxonomy, date, meta field, these 4 options. Now, you want to select plain query var, which is plain query variable, which simply means that it wants to get a particular information from the filters when it's clicked on. And I want to show you that, because when you select filters here and you come inside that filter that we just created, you want to select the filter we created in the previous step, and that's it here, right? Now you want to come down here and remember that you're getting the value from term ID, which means that this is the value that's sent to the database once a filter is being clicked on. So term ID, right? Now that also means that when you use this particular macro inside of here, you're gonna say that it's a plain query variable, because that's of course what's going to be fetched into the query variable using the key right here. So you want to select the plain query variable and you want to type in term ID. So let's just copy that and select term ID. It's not a date variable, so you want to leave that as it is. You want to come to results format and select plain. Now what it does is that once you've applied this and added this query, when you make use of this query, it's going to return nothing, pretty much nothing, until you have selected something in the Jet Smart Filters filter. But after a person clicks on the filter, then the query works. And this is a use case to let your queries depend on your filter to work. Remember, I'm going to cover this in depth in a future video. This next feature is surprisingly not familiar to most people for a reason I cannot understand, but let me show you how it works. You can show or hide your content based on whether a query exists or not. Now, I have this query here which I created, which is query of other users, and the query specifies that the user role of editor must be the role of all the users returned in this query. I know for sure that on this particular demo site, I only have 1 administrator and 2 subscribers. So this is supposed to return nothing. And if we preview results here, we can see that it returns nothing. Absolutely nothing. Result count 0. Great. Now this is going to work for the use case we want to show. Because now if we come into JetEngine, and of course you want to ensure that dynamic visibility is toggled on here, which is this particular option right here, right? Let's add a new container here. And to add a new container, we're just going to put in the container here, and we're going to inside that container put in a heading. Now after you add the container and the widget inside of it, you want to come to advanced by selecting the container first of all, come to advanced, then come here to dynamic visibility and toggle that on. You want to select and show items, show elements if the query has items. And then you want to check the query which you just created, which is the query of other users. Recall, that was the particular query on which we want to base this. So you want to select that query and you want to say, show this element if that query has items. You know what's going to happen, right? Because the number of items here is 0, as you can see in the result count here. This particular item is not going to show. We want to test that in the front end by just clicking on publish, and then we're going to come to the front end here and let's refresh and see if it shows. Nothing shows because of course that particular query returns 0, and based on that we're hiding that particular widget. Now just think of all the use cases and possibilities in which you can use this. I leave it up to you. For most situations, you can add a new query and just select a query type, and one of these many query types can work exactly the way you want it to. However, there are certain unique cases in which none of these query types work the exact way you want them to, and you need to get your hands dirty and go into the database and fetch your stuff yourself. And that is where we go to the next feature, which is fetch anything from the database with SQL. To do that, you want to select the query type of SQL/AI query. You want to come down here to custom SQL query and select the table in the database from which you want to fetch your item from. And for this particular one, I'm just going to select a very bare bones, simple example just to help you understand it. But just note that the limit of what you can accomplish here is really your imagination. I want to select something from the posts table, and as you can see here, once you preview results, you can see that you have hundreds of posts, 290 posts, and all of them are from the different post types on the site. Just so you know, a WordPress menu is a post type technically. If you come here to appearance and select menus, whenever you create a new WordPress menu, what you actually are creating is a post type. And let's just see as a quick example here. New menu. And we want to create menu, and let's just add a few items to the menu here so we can understand visually how it works. Let's select a few items and add them to the menu. We're done, and we click on Save Menu. Now if you come back to Query Builder, watch as the result count 290 increases here. Let's just toggle this off and toggle it back on. Now you can see 294. Why 294? Because now we have 4 new posts inside of here. But what exactly is the post type of menu? What exactly is it? Let's see. If we come here to where, we can add a new option here and select the column post type. When we select post type, we want to say that the post type is equal to what? Nav menu item, separated like this. Nav separated with an underscore, menu, and item. And as you can see, it returns 4 items here. All of these 4 items can now be printed out on a particular page where you can now have your menu items dynamically printed. It takes a lot more setup than I have just shown here to actually get this to work, but just keep in mind that this is a possibility, and this is a use case for something you can do with an SQL query that you cannot right now do with any of the predefined query types. Our next feature is to use shortcodes to get any data into your query, and I'm going to show you that right now. Sometimes when you're building a site, the place from which you get your comma-separated IDs may not be part of JetEngine. It could be maybe a different plugin, such as the Dynamic Shortcodes plugin, which you can use to basically create a shortcode that fetches whatever you want, anywhere you want on any particular site. And this particular situation here is useful when the data you want to fetch is actually found inside of a shortcode. But for now, let's use a JetEngine shortcode to demonstrate this. If we come inside JetEngine and we come here, we can fetch a list of IDs from anywhere we want. Let's say we have a list of IDs stored inside of a checkbox or a multi-select field. And we can grab that list of IDs meta field here, and we can also filter field output and add a new callback item. And then right here, we can select multiple select field values and separate them with a comma. Now, this is where it gets very important. Whatever shortcode we're going to make use of in this particular situation has to have its data fed back to us in a comma separated values format. Now, this would return all the data in a comma separated value format because, of course, the delimiter here is a comma. Now, this is the shortcode generated right here. If we grab that shortcode and we come inside Query Builder and add a new query, let's see what we can do with the shortcode. And just keep this in mind for any project you have in the future where you don't really know how to grab your data from anywhere, but you have a shortcode that does the job for you. Now, here is how you do it. Let's say we want to create a simple post query of posts with the basically publish post, but we want to get the IDs from somewhere, and we're going to select post and page, and where we have post in, you notice here it says comma separated post IDs list, for example 1, 10, 25, something like that. Now, if you have a shortcode that prints that out for you, you want to select shortcode result here, and now you can simply paste in that shortcode and click on apply. Now, what happens is that this particular query will be based on whatever that shortcode returns as its list of values. I'd really love for you to hit the subscribe button right now, because in the future, I'm going to release videos that cover these concepts in full detail. So you want to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Speaking of shortcodes, did you know that you can comma separate anything like IDs or even shortcodes themselves in Query Builder? Let's see how to do that. It should be a no-brainer that you can come into post in for this particular query, for example, and comma separate IDs of posts. For example, you can write 4, 56, 123. All of this being post IDs would return all of this as posts in the particular query. And that makes complete sense. But did you also know that if you select what I just showed you in the previous example, where you can type in shortcode result and type in the particular shortcode, that you can also comma separate the shortcode? You can, after typing in the shortcode, add a comma and paste in another shortcode. For example, this. Let's drag this down so you can see everything very clearly. You can see that the first shortcode ends here and the next shortcode begins here. Assume that you have multiple shortcodes which all together are supposed to return an array of IDs. You can all comma separate them right here. And that is mind-blowing, because think about the capabilities that this will open up for you. But what if the shortcode or whatever macro you make use of returns nothing as its result? What do you do? With JetEngine Query Builder, you can use fallbacks, and here is how you do it. All you need to do is to click on Advanced Settings, and inside here, type in the fallback. For example, the fallback here could be, let's say, 20 as the post ID to return if all of the shortcodes I pasted in there returned nothing. And that makes sense. But let's go into something a bit more mind juggling, and that is pop-ups. You can base your pop-ups on queries, and here's how. You need to install Jet Pop-up, of course. And now let's just create a simple pop-up as an example here. So let's create a pop-up. We can use a preset just so we can be faster and say, show this pop-up when the current user has a post published on the site. That's a long name, but it drives the message. You can now create the pop-up. Now, once the pop-up is created, you need to do a few things. First of all, you need to create a query, and this particular query, you want to make sure that it tells us exactly what the pop-up says it's supposed to do. And that is this, or let's call this query all posts of current logged in user. Remember that the pop-up is supposed to show, if we come back here into the settings, we can see the name of the pop-up. It is supposed to show when the current user has a post published on the site. So we want to create a query that does just that. So let's select post as the post type. We want to select published because that's the post status we're aiming for. We want to come now to author, and inside of author ID, we want to select the current user ID. So we just want to type in user and click on current user ID and add query. Now, once we're done with that, we want to come back here. We don't really care right now about the content of this pop-up, or do we? No, we don't. Now, we want to come back to this particular Jet pop-up right here, and we want to edit the conditions. Let's say we want this to show on the front page of the site. So we can select singular as the include option and select front page. And that makes sense. But we also want to add another condition, and that condition is to show it if the current logged in user has post published on the site, right? So we want to add another condition and include by, this time, JetEngine, and select here the query has items. And which query is that? The query of all posts of current logged in user. Now, if the query has items, that is, if the current logged in user has any post on the site, this pop-up will show. Now you see how you can base a pop-up on a query. Let's save conditions and we can use this now. Next, let's cover the case of manipulating and handling repeaters with JetEngine. To do this, we want to create first an options page. So let's just come to JetEngine and select options page. And let's close out this other ones because we're done with it. And we can add a new options page. Once we're here in the options page, let's for now just call this Glossary Simulator. Nice name, awesome name. Right now, after adding it, you can see that it shows right here as Glossary Simulator. So let's just add a new repeater meta field here. So we're going to click on new field, and here on the label, we're going to call this values of nothing. And of course, it's because I have absolutely no idea what to add here, but I'm just going to make this as simple to understand as possible. Under field type, we're going to select repeater. And this would usually be for a use case such as this. You want to add a name and a value. For example, you want to say name and value. So you have those two fields there that are going to be repeated when you click on add new repeater. So let's just see how it works here. If we come to Glossary Simulator here, we see that we can add new values of nothing. So a name, we can say first item, and we can add the value as first item. We can come down here to the next one and say second item, and we can add that here as second item. Now, just keep in mind you can add an unlimited number of items to a repeater. That's why it's a repeater, because it doesn't have a limit. Now, here's how you can manipulate and make use of repeaters. You can simply come into the particular query of the repeater, or you can create a new one. And that's exactly what I want to do. I want to create a new query. Let's add a new query and say query of repeaters. If I can spell repeaters. And now I can come to query and select here repeater query. And now under source, I want to select JetEngine option field, because of course this originates from the options page. Remember, we created an options page first. If you didn't create an options page and you put the repeater into a regular post type or something else, you want to select the equivalent value here, like meta field or custom field, whatever is equivalent to what you did or works for you. For me, I'm going to select JetEngine options field. I'm going to select here value of nothing, because that's exactly the repeater field I created. Now you can add query, and if you come to the preview result here and just toggle it on, you're going to see all of the items that are in my repeater. And by all of the items, I mean the 2 items. You can see the result count is 2 here, can't you? And you can also see the name and the value, the name and the values. Second item, first item, makes absolute sense. Now, based on this particular query, you can have a listing grid of items of this particular repeater. To demonstrate that even more, let's go to the next step, which is to replace JetEngine Glossaries easily. And to show you that, let's come back to the JetEngine dashboard. By default, here is how the glossaries are supposed to work. You're supposed to come into glossaries under JetEngine dashboard, and you're just gonna add a new glossary. I already created one here, a simple manual glossary where I selected the data source as set items manually and added 2 manual items here. You can move things around. The first thing is the last thing is the first, just the same way you would do with the glossary simulator here, in which you can move things around. But the advantage of having to create a glossary simulator such as I have created here would be that you can do way more things with the JetEngine Query Builder when you actually create a glossary simulator like I have done, instead of using the glossaries. And I'll tell you about the disadvantages of using glossaries right now. For example, if you want to add items in bulk, the best way to add them would be to get items from an uploaded file. But you would do that by using JSON or CSV to fetch the files in. You can't any longer move items around just like this. However, you still have another limitation, and that is this, that you cannot really query this glossary unless it is used in places where glossary is approved to be used. For example, when you're using the select meta field, like I would show you now, if you come into meta boxes and you want to, let's say you want to add an additional information for your particular post. Let's say you want to add for your post type of post, you want to add a meta field, and you want to come in here to field type and make that a select field. You can select as the source a glossary, and you can select that particular glossary in here, and that will be great, except the fact that when you need to disable certain options for certain users based on certain factors, you cannot just do that, because one glossary is the same glossary for everybody. But there is a way to manipulate that using the glossary simulator I've created here. And here's how you do it. First of all, let's come back into the particular options page that we created before, and let's modify this particular meta field a little bit. Let's add one more item here. I want to edit this particular field here and add one more field to this repeater. And that field, I'm going to call it disable this option. And I want to change the type here and make it a switcher. Now, once it's toggled on, I want it to be disabled. That's simply what I want to say. So if I refresh this, I can see that the glossary simulator now has an additional option, which of course the glossary does not have. The glossary cannot allow you to add new meta fields to the particular glossary list. You can only use a field label and a field value, and that's it. Or you can select any of this item as checked. And that's not enough sometimes. Sometimes you need to do more things with it. And here is an example of more things that you need to do with it. Let's say you want to disable the first item and save this glossary simulator. Let's come back here to the query builder, and we're going to say here that this will fetch the repeater query and that the source would be JetEngine option field, because that of course is on an options page, right? Remember, it's an options page. We're going to come in here and select the option of values of nothing. Now, when we have this query argument here, we want to say that the field key or the field name for this particular disable this option meta field here should be equal to something. So we're going to select that. I was saying that it should be equal to, and on the value, we're going to say false. Now, if we come to preview results here and we look at the list of items returned here, we see we only have one item. And that is because the second item you see here is the item that was not disabled. Now, imagine what you can do with having to query items and manipulate the repeaters in this way. You can pretty much replace your JetEngine glossary and use the query builder entirely. Let's just see how that works. Let's give our query a name. We're going to call the query Simulator of JetEngine Glossary, and we're going to click on Add Query. Now, after creating our query, we want to come in here to meta box and add a new meta box. And the meta box we want to add, let's just call this Select from Query Builder Glossary. Okay. And now we want to say that this is for post, and what post type? Let's just say it's for the post type of post. And the meta field here, we're going to say select items, and that's the label. And we want to come down here to field type and click on select. And instead of selecting glossary, which we would normally do, we want to select query builder now, and we want to select simulator of JetEngine Glossary as the query type or the query, and we want to select that simulator as the query. The next thing we want to do is to set both the value field and the label field, because of course this is going to return nothing for now. When we take a look again at that particular query, we notice one thing right here, and that is this, that the result of the query has things inside of its array. And this is one of the things we need, the name. We also need here the value. So we're going to grab those two. We're going to select under here value. Of course, keep in mind this can be anything else besides value. We can have also label, which is a good example to show you that it can be name or it can be label, whatever you want to call it. Just keep in mind whatever you want to show in your value should be mapped to value. Whatever you want to show in your label should be mapped. Once you're done with that and you come here and add meta box, we can now view a single post as an example and edit it, and let's see what we have in our select field. Right here, we can see that under select items, we have second item as the option in the list here. If we come back to the query simulator here, the glossary simulator, pardon me, and we add a new item, third item, and we want to call this third item. Once we save and we come to the edit post option and refresh this, now you see the beautiful thing is that we have two items added here. Just see how this can quickly replace the glossary and how you can use this in your day-to-day work. Oh, and while we're here, I have this FAQ repeater that I created here, a meta field that can help a person to add questions and answers on their site. And this is nice because a client can add their data in the back end and have it show in the front end. But how do we do this? This is when we need to show a listing without creating a JetEngine listing. And to do that, let's add a few questions here. Have you subscribed to my YouTube channel? Should I type yes? Or you want to do that now? Good. Yes. So let's add another one. Have you liked this video? Yes or no? Yes, right? Good. So now you want to click on save, because now you've created 2 items that are going to appear in the FAQ. If we look at this in the front end by just simply clicking on edit and editing this particular page, we see that it returns absolutely nothing. Let's just remove this particular widget here and let's add in a new widget. We're going to add the accordion widget, the classic accordion widget, and we want to base the query of this particular accordion on the query of this particular post so that it gets all of the FAQs right here. To do that, we first want to create a query builder query, and that query builder query is going to query all FAQs. To query that, we're going to select query all FAQs, and now we're going to select the query type as repeater query because of course this is a repeater. Next, you want to select on the source JetEngine meta field, which is of course because we created a meta box, and we come here to JetEngine field and select FAQs. Now once you're done with that and you've added the query, you can come to the front end and let's just publish this and refresh it a bit. Now once that is published, you can come back here to the accordion and remove all of the accordion items except one. Now you want to toggle on use JetEngine query and select the query of all FAQs. You can see that it naturally returns 2 items here because the frequently asked questions for this particular page are 2 items. And it makes sense. But right now it's not showing the question and it's also not showing the answer inside of here. We want to change that. And to change that, we're going to come inside here to the content type and return that to editor because we don't want to use a template for this. We can of course use a template, but we don't want to use it for this. Now to set the label, you want to come inside here to dynamic tags and you want to come down here to current object field. Keep in mind that in Bricks Builder, as of September 19th, you can now use this JE current object field dynamic token here to return a current object field like you would do in Elementor. So just keep that in mind. You can separate it with a colon and type in the particular field key name. But for Elementor users, just follow me. We can select the field here. And the field you want to select is to come down here and look for that particular query. And the query here is the query of FAQs. Recall? Yes. And you want to fetch in here the question. Once you click on that, you see the question fetched in here. And that is all dynamic. You can repeat the same step for the content by just clicking on dynamic tags again, come into current object field, selecting here the field, scroll down here to the particular query, which is query of FAQs, and select the answer. And you can see, have you subscribed to my YouTube channel? Is yes. Have you liked this video? Is yes. What if you want another site to fetch data from your own site using the JetEngine Query Builder? You can expose that data using the REST API, and I'll show you how. Here's how you want to do that. You want to come here and add a new query. And let's say that we want to fetch all the posts on our sites that are published and expose that data to a REST API such that another site can fetch that data from our own. Here's how you do it. Let's call that expose posts to a REST API. Now we're going to select post as the query type. We're going to select the post type of post here. And here we want to select published posts. Now to expose it, you just want to toggle on register REST API endpoint. Now under endpoint namespace, what you type in here really doesn't matter. It's just what comes after WP-JSON, that's all. So you want to type in here something unique, let's say YouTube. And inside of endpoint path, you want to type in what will come after YouTube. And that you're going to type in something like subscribers. I know it doesn't make any sense right now. I just want to put it in your mind to subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's what I'm trying to do here, right? But keep in mind that whatever you type in here really doesn't matter. It just ends up creating an endpoint URL for you. Now you want to select a restrict access option. It's either public or users with selected capabilities or users with selected roles. I'm going to cover this some more in a video in the future, so let's just keep it simple for now. Let's say that the access is set to public and there's nothing else, no other query arguments, nothing else, and we can add the query. Now, take note of what happens when we actually copy this endpoint URL and open a new tab and paste that in here. We have this URL loaded here, and a bunch of raw JSON data that can be consumed by another app that accepts this kind of REST API. And I'm going to show you that in the next feature. With Query Builder, you can also fetch data from the REST API. In the previous chapter, we talked about how we can create this URL and have it return this JavaScript object notation listing of items from a particular query and have this particular URL be consumed by another app or web app or website, whatever it is. And now I'm going to show you how you can actually do the consumption. Here's how you can do it. I want to come to a different website. Right now we're on demo.tobysalami.com. Let's go to my main website at tobysalami.com. You can see this is a different website. There are two different websites. I want to come to this main website and come to REST API endpoint. Keep in mind that first of all, you need to come to modules and toggle on REST API listings for this to work. Now you want to come to REST API endpoint and I want to click on new endpoint. Now, first I want to give the endpoint a name. Let's call this from my demo site. Okay. Or post from my demo site. I can call it that. Post from my demo site. Now I want to type in the endpoint URL and I can grab that here and come in here to the main site and paste the endpoint URL here. There is nothing else to do here because there is no form of authorization which I need to enter. We did not restrict the access and we allowed it to be visible to the public. So we want to select here the authorization, toggle it off, and we just want to send request. We want to confirm that the API connection is successful. And as you can see here, it's connected. We want to click on save and we have post from my demo site created. Now, when you come to Query Builder on my main website, you can come to add new here. And when you add a new option, you want to see posts from REST API. Now, inside of query type, you want to select REST API query. Now, you want to come to the endpoint selection and select posts from my demo site. Now, to ensure that this is actually working, let's preview results again. You can see when I preview results that I have result count of 5 and it's showing me all of the 5 posts that I have on this other website. Let's confirm that it actually is true. If we look carefully at this query that we just created and toggle on preview result count, you see that it returns the count of 5, which means the same number of posts that is being queried here is being cached by this other website through the REST API query, and that makes complete sense. Now you can create a listing and base your listing on this particular query on a different site. What if we want to do something more fancy? Let's say we want to grab the variable product as individual product items to be shown on a particular site. We don't want to show a parent product that has variables to be selected from. We want to show the variable products as individual products. How do we do that? Let's call the product sample variation products. Now we want to come down to product data and instead of simple product, we want to set variable product. Now we want to come to attributes and create different attributes for them. Now for the size, we're just going to select and separate with the pipe character L, XL, and finally XXL. Now we have these 3 different attributes on which we want to base our variations. We can come inside variations now and generate variations and click on OK. And we have our 3 variations generated right here. We can simply click on publish and we're done with creating our Woocommerce variation. The next thing we want to do is to come into Query Builder and let's refresh this so we can have all of the latest stuff fetched in. Now if we come to query type and select instead of Woocommerce product query, we want to select post query. Why? Because technically speaking, Woocommerce variations are posts. So it makes sense when we select post query now and come down here inside of post type and just type in variations. Now if we come here to preview results, we can see the number of variations we created. There are 3, right? 3. And those are all of the variations we have right here inside this post. But the problem with that is that if we create another product and add new variations, they'll all keep showing in here as the result count of all the variations on the site. If that's what you want, fine. But what if you want to show on a single product page all of the product variations in a separate listing? Here's how you would do it. If you look inside here to the data returned when you fetch the variation, you have something in here called post parent. Can you take note? Good. If we come back inside the product that has this variation, you notice in the URL, you have 359 as the post ID there, and you also have the same 359 as the post ID here. It means that the post parent here, the value for post parent here, is the actual product that has the variation inside of it. Now to do that, here is what you want to do. You want to come here to post and page, and under post parent ID, let's test it out. Remember that the product that has all of this variation has the post ID of 359. If we type in 359 here, we notice that the result count is still 3. If we change this to 35, for example, it's 0. So 359 results in 3 products which are in the variations, and that means it's working. It makes sense. Now, if this query is going to be used on a single post page, or let's call it a single product page, to carry all of the variations in a separate listing, instead of typing it in here, you want to select current ID, and this will fetch all of the variations of a particular product on the single product page. But what if what you want to get is all of the items in the Woocommerce cart? Here's how you do it. You would change the post query here to a Woocommerce product query. Now we can easily change the name to query of items in cart. That's a better name, right? Now after selecting that, we can come down here, and inside of the general tab here, we have this include by, which needs a comma separated list of all of the post IDs we want to add to this query. Now to do that, you want to come click on this icon here for the macros and select here cart. Just type in cart and you see WC products in cart. It simply means Woocommerce products in cart. And based on this, you can fetch all of the products that are currently in the cart by just creating this simple query here. Now let's talk about relationships and how we can fetch and show them. To demonstrate this, I already have a posts and pages relationship I created here. As you can see, I wrote here posts P and pages C, and my reason for that is just to specify that post is a parent and pages is a child, as you can see here. Posts, pages. Makes sense, right? Good. Now once that relation is done, you can come inside of posts or pages and see that relationship when you edit any of those post types. If you come down here, you can notice that the particular relationship is shown down here. I have a post here which is connected to a particular page, and that's how pretty much relationships work. But how can you query that with JetEngine Query Builder? Just come into JetEngine and select Query Builder. And once you have Query Builder selected, add a new query and say that you want to query all items related to current post. And makes sense. Now, what do you really need to query? On a post page such as this, what you need to query is a page. So you need to keep it at post query, but on the post type, you need to select pages. Now, after you select the post type, you want to come to post and page, and where you have post in, it expects a comma separated ID list. And here you can easily click on this dynamic icon and type in related items. Once you get related items, it'll ask you from which relation do you want to get this. And I want to get this from posts and pages relationship. And I can see right here visually that post is a parent, pages is a child. So what do I want to show? I want to show the pages, which is the child object. But what do I want to get the ID from? The ID that will check for the relationship. And because this query is going to be run on the single post page, I'm going to select here current object ID and click on apply. Once I click on add query, now I can go to the single page and use this particular query to create a listing of all of the items that appear here. Now that is just an example. You can create as many relations as possible and query them exactly the way I showed you using the JetEngine Query Builder. Our next feature will show you how you can match your queries with your filters and your listings via IDs. I've had many situations in the past where a smart filter was not working because it was not connected properly to a query builder and also to a particular listing on a page such as this. Let's select the listing and just give it a listing CSS ID. For example, we want to call this CS Good name. Now let's call that the CSS ID of this particular listing. And let's try to add a smart filter on the page. For this particular filter, the filter based on query, it's a radio filter. So we're just going to type in radio and drag in that radio filter there. We want to select the filter, which the filter we called filter based on query. So we're just going to type in filter based on query here. Now, since the filter is meant for JetEngine, which is particularly this listing here, and it makes technical sense that way, let's just give this a color that we can see, and we're just going to leave this as a white color. Now, we see the 4 items that we have fetched from this particular filter right here. And we want to be able to use this particular filter to sort the query posts based on whatever term is selected here. So, to get that to work, we're going to select that filter, but this is something we need to do. We will need to set inside of here the query ID of CS, because that is the same query ID that we used here. Now, once we publish this page, we need to do one more thing because of the fact that this particular filter and this particular listing ID have CSS IDs, which of course translates to query IDs for the Query Builder queries. We need also to set that inside of the Query Builder query. So which Query Builder query are we going to set that inside of? The same Query Builder query on which this particular listing is based. If we select content and come down here to custom query, we see that it's based on published post. So let's come back to Query Builder and select that particular query of published post. Here we go. Once we select published post, we need to come inside here to query ID and set this to CS. Once we update, we see just before we updated that there is a warning here saying, please make sure you set up the same ID for any filters used with this query. And that is just for the sole purpose of having it work correctly. If we come to the front end now and refresh this, we see that once we click on love, it filters and only shows us the 2 posts that are inside of the term love. Our next feature is building filterable tables, and to do that we need to come to the back end here and come to Tables Builder, which of course we need to select when we come inside of JetEngine, and we have the modules and we select here Dynamic Tables Builder. Now once we select the Tables Builder option here, we need to click on Add New, and based on what query are we going to add in a new table? Recall we created a different query some time ago. Let's select that particular query and see how it is as a refresher for our brains. But we have this particular query already created. Now, what we need to do is to show, as you can see in the preview results, now we need to show the name and the value in a table format. How do we do this? Let's create the table, and when we come here and give it a name, we can just set that to glossary display table. Now on the data query, we can select the Query Builder query we created called Simulator of JetEngine Glossary. So we're going to select that here, Simulator of JetEngine Glossary. Let's fetch data. Let's see how it does. It shows done, meaning it's working. Now we need to come to columns and add a new column. The first column, we're going to have the name. And where do we want to fetch that from? We want to say raw value. And the data source, we want to select fetch column and come down here to name. We want to create another one, which we can call value, and we select raw value and select fetch column and value. Now I want to click on create table. Keep in mind that you can use this and base this on anything. It doesn't have to be a repeater. It can be a list of posts. It can be a list of pages, whatever you want to select, your choice. After page refresh, we can come here to widgets and type in table. We can drag in dynamic table here and select the table glossary display table. And let's just give it nice looking colors so that we can see all of the items here. And you can take note that the name and the value are all shown here, just exactly as it is inside of the glossary simulator which we previously created, as you can see here. If we toggle off this item which we disabled here, and of course which we did not allow to show by the definitions in our queries, we can come to the front end. Let's hit publish. Let's come to the front end here and refresh this. Let's see if it now shows. As you can see, the first item now shows because we allowed it to. This is a way to pretty much query whatever you want to query and return it in the table format. The next feature should be a no-brainer, but I still need to show this, so I will. I want to show you how you can build listings based on queries. On the exact query that this table exists, we want to build a particular JetEngine listing. So on the simulator of JetEngine Glossary, we want to create a new listing. We're going to click on Add New Listing Item, and it doesn't really matter your page builder here. You can just select Query Builder, and you need to select the particular query that we just created. And that particular query is Simulator of JetEngine Glossary. Now, let's call this Glossary Listing. Now, we want to come here and click on Create Listing Item after selecting whether it's Elementor or bricks or whatever, blocks, whatever we want to use. Now, we want to add in a new layout here. And now, with our dynamic field, we can grab the value from that particular query. And that all means that we can, after putting the dynamic field widget here, just select the source. And what will the source be? Let's scroll all the way until we find the query for Simulator of JetEngine Glossary. As you can see here, we want to get the name, and let's duplicate this. We want to also get, we can scroll all the way down and find the query of Simulator of JetEngine Glossary and get the value. As you can see, it gets one value here, the first item, the name, and the value. We can publish that. And if we come in here to the editor, we can type in listing and grab our listing grid here and select the listing we just created, which we called glossary listing. Now you can see how you can base your listing on a query builder query. We're down to number 24, and that is map listings based on queries. And the way to achieve this is pretty simple. Let's see. The first step is that you want to create a map meta field. And to do that, let's just select posts settings for maps as the meta box title for this particular meta box we're creating. And next, you want to select the post type of post, or whichever post type you want to select there. And we want to add a new meta field. We want to set address. And under address, we want to select here the field type of map. And this will enable us to be able to select from and pinpoint places on the map as our address for each particular post. This will help us to be able to fetch in the front end posts based on address. And now, after you add that particular map field, you want to add that meta box and you want to come to posts. Let's edit one of the posts and see how it displays here. If we edit that one and scroll down here, you can see here that now you can very easily zoom into a particular location and click on it, and it would actually select that location. And this is what you particularly need to make the map listing work. Once you're done, just hit save. Now you can create a query for that particular map listing by clicking on Query Builder, of course. And now you can add new. You can add a new query such as show all posts nearby. This doesn't make much sense. It should be show all schools nearby or show all hospitals nearby. Whatever your post type is, you can use it here. Doesn't really matter. Now you can come to query type, and of course you want to keep that as posts because it's a post query really. What's really important here is the geo search. And you can come in here and just select a particular location around which you want to search. So if I click on Canada, for example, which of course the last post which I selected was based, you can select Canada and just give it a distance around which do you want this particular post listing to search. And you can type in the distance here. Let's say it's 200 and the unit is miles. So you want to select a radius of 200 miles. Now you also want to set the address field. The address field here is called address. You can just copy that and paste it in here. Once you're done, you can add query, and that is how a map listing can work. Because right now, when you base your listing on this particular query, it's going to show only posts that are within a 200-mile radius of that particular selected location. Make sense? Good. If it doesn't, don't worry, I'm going to cover this in an in-depth video in the future, so watch out. We're down to number 25, and in this particular one, I want to show you how you can create charts based on queries. To do that, you want to come inside of JetEngine and to modules and ensure that Dynamic Charts Builder is selected here. Next, you want to come inside of the Query Builder and query whatever you want to base your charts on. Let's assume you already did that because I've shown too many examples of queries here, different query types here. I want to just go ahead and show you how you can work with it inside of the Charts Builder. Now come to Charts Builder here, and when you select that, you need to add a new chart. And what chart is that going to be? You can give it a name. You can say charts of best posts. And now you can come to data query and select query of published posts. We want to fetch the data and it's done. Great. So it's fetched the data. We can come here to chart type and we want to show bar. And now we're going to come to columns and add new columns. First, we want to select post title as the first column. The data source would be from the fetch column and we're going to select post title. That's the first and it's the most important. Once we're done and that is selected, we want to set the data type to string. And that makes sense because the post title is not a number, it's not a date, it's a string. Now, after creating the first column, you want to keep in mind that with a chart type such as a bar chart like this, it needs to compare the first column with something else, and that something else is usually a number value, and that's what usually depends how far up or down or to the right or to the left that this bar chart usually could be. And so if we come to columns here and select, let's say, we can call this power ID. It doesn't make sense, but it's because I know in my mind that post IDs are usually incremental. They go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 and so on. We can fetch the post ID here because that's going to be a number, right? And we're going to select the data type as number. Of course, you want to point this to a particular meta field that carries a particular value. Let's say you want it to show the number of views of a particular post. This is where the fetched column of views will apply. But for now, let's just use the ID because it's a number and of course the number is incremental. Let's see how it applies. Once we click on Update Chart and we come into the editor here, we can select the charts, dynamic chart widget here and select that particular chart, which is the chart of best posts that you can see here. And you can notice here that the post with the highest number of what I call power ID, which is actually the ID of the post, is shown here, 235. This one is 228. As you can see, the bar is smaller, and hello world is actually 1, as you can see here. So you can basically build an entire chart just like this based on the Query Builder query. And that brings us to the end of the 25 features that I intended to show you that you can do with JetEngine Query Builder. I'm going to be releasing each of these 25 different things as separate videos in which I'm going to cover each of them in full detail. So you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel where I'll be releasing these videos one by one. As always, I remain Toby Salami, and until next time, stay dynamic.